My name is Sloane Parker, and I'm 28 years old. Right now, I'm sitting in a mahogany-paneled law office in Manhattan, staring across the table at my stepmother Margot, who's wearing a smile that makes my skin crawl. She leans close, her perfume suffocating, and whispers just loud enough for only me to hear, "You'll get nothing. Your father made sure of that." My hands tremble in my lap as Mr. Whitmore, the lawyer, clears his throat and opens a cream-colored envelope with my father's seal embossed in gold. The room falls silent, his eyes scan the document, and then he looks up, directly at me. "Miss Parker," he begins, and I watch Margot's smile widen in triumph. But then his next words shatter everything. "You inherit the entire estate, valued at $191 million. Margot's face drains of all color. Mrs. Parker receives. Before we dive into how I got here, drop a comment below and let me know where you're watching from. Have you ever dealt with family betrayal or someone trying to manipulate a loved one? Hit that like button if you want to see justice served, and subscribe because this story has more twists than you can imagine. Trust me, what happens next will shock you. And you won't want to miss a single moment of how my father outsmarted the woman who tried to destroy us both. Now, let me take you back 6 months to where this nightmare really began. 6 months before that fateful day in the lawyer's office, my life looked completely different. I was living in Chicago, working as an architect at Sterling and Associates, one of the most prestigious firms in the Midwest. I had spent years building my career, designing sustainable residential projects that had won several awards, but none of that professional success could fill the hole that had existed in my heart since I was 12 years old, when my mother passed away from a sudden brain aneurysm. It happened so fast. One day, she was laughing at breakfast, and 3 days later, we were standing at her funeral. After that, it was just me and my father, Richard Parker, against the world. Dad built Parker Technologies from nothing, starting in a garage with just an idea for data security software that would revolutionize how companies protected their information. By the time I graduated from college, his company was worth hundreds of millions. But despite all that wealth, he never lost sight of what mattered. He came to every school play, every parent-teacher conference, every soccer game where I mostly sat on the bench. When Mom died, he could have buried himself in work, but instead he made sure I knew I was his priority. We had Sunday morning pancakes, movie nights every Friday, and annual trips to our cabin in Vermont where we'd hike and talk about everything from quantum physics to my high school crushes. He was my hero, my best friend, my entire world. Then, 4 years ago, everything changed. Dad met Margot at a charity gala for children's hospitals. I remember him calling me that night, his voice lighter than it had been in years. "Sloane, I met someone," he said, and I could hear the smile through the phone. "I know it sounds crazy, but there's something special about her." I was happy for him. Truly, I was. Had been alone for so long, throwing himself into work and making sure I had everything I needed, but never taking care of his own heart. If Head found someone who made him smile again, who was I to stand in the way? When he introduced us 2 weeks later at a restaurant in Tribeca, Margot was everything I expected. Beautiful, elegant, charming. She had honey blonde hair that fell in perfect waves, wore a designer dress that probably cost more than my monthly rent, and spoke with the kind of polish that came from expensive boarding schools and cotillion classes. "Your father has told me so much about you," she said, reaching across the table to squeeze my hand. Her skin was cool, her grip firm. "Has so proud of everything you've accomplished. An architect. How wonderful." I wanted to like her. I tried to like her. Dad deserved happiness, and if this woman could give that to him, I was willing to welcome her into our family. The first few months seemed perfect. They went on romantic getaways to Paris and Santorini, Dad sent me photos of them at sunset, both grinning like teenagers. When he called to tell me they were engaged after just 6 months, I swallowed my concerns about the speed and told him I was thrilled. "Are you sure?" he asked, his voice uncertain. "I know it's fast, but when you get to my age, you realize life's too short to waste time." I assured him I supported his decision, and I meant it, even though something in my gut whispered warnings I chose to ignore. The wedding was small, elegant, held at the Plaza Hotel with only close friends and family. I was Margot's maid of honor because she claimed she had no close female relatives, which should have been my first red flag. Dad looked happier than I'd seen him since Mom died, and I convinced myself that my unease was just the natural adjustment of sharing my father with someone new. But the shift began almost immediately after they returned from their honeymoon in the Maldives. Suddenly, our Sunday morning phone calls started getting cut short. "Your father's resting," Margot would say when she answered his phone. "Has been so tired lately. All that travel wore him out. I'll have him call you back." He never did. Our planned lunch dates in the city would get canceled at the last minute. Dad would text, "Sorry, sweetheart. Something came up at work. Rain check." When I'd call his office, his assistant Harper would say quietly, "Has been in meetings all day." Mrs. Parker scheduled his entire calendar. The real warning signs started about a year into their marriage. I flew in for Dad's 62nd birthday, expecting our usual celebration at his favorite steakhouse. Instead, Margot had planned an elaborate party at their penthouse with people I'd never met, business associates and society friends who spent the evening talking about real estate and stock portfolios. Dad looked uncomfortable, tugging at his collar and searching for me in the crowd. When I finally managed to corner him on the terrace, he pulled me into a tight hug. "I'm so glad you're here," he whispered. "I feel like I haven't seen you in forever." We talked for maybe 10 minutes before Margot appeared, her hand possessive on his arm. "Darling, the Vanderbilts want to say hello," she said, her voice sweet but her eyes cold as they met mine. "Sloan, be a dear and make sure the caterers have enough champagne." She steered him away before either of us could protest. That night, I stayed over in the guest room I'd always used, but it felt different. The photos of me and Dad that used to line the hallway had been replaced with modern art. My mother's paintings that Dad had treasured were gone from the living room. When I asked about them at breakfast, Margot said breezily, "Oh, those old things, they didn't match the new decor. I had them put in storage." Dad looked pained but said nothing, and that silence scared me more than anything. This wasn't the man who'd taught me to stand up for what mattered. Something was very wrong. My real ally during this time was Julian Caldwell, Dad's business partner and best friend since college. They'd built Parker Technologies together, with Julian handling operations while Dad focused on development. Julian and his wife Corinne had been like aunt and uncle to me growing up, and Corinne especially had stepped in after Mom died to help with all the things a teenage girl needed. When I confided my concerns to Julian over coffee one afternoon, his expression turned grave. "I've been worried too," he admitted. "Your father's different lately. Distracted, withdrawn, and Margot has been inserting herself into company business where she has no expertise. She convinced him to change the board composition, bringing in people loyal to her. I've tried to talk to him, but he gets defensive, says I don't understand their marriage." Julian leaned closer, his voice dropping. "That woman is after his money, Sloan. I'd bet my life on it. We need to watch her carefully." The call came on a Tuesday morning in October. I was in the middle of a presentation to a new client when my phone wouldn't stop buzzing. The fourth time, I excused myself and stepped into the hallway. Julian's name flashed on the screen. "It's your father," he said without preamble, his voice tight. "He collapsed at the office this morning. We're at Mount Sinai. You need to get here now." I don't remember the cab ride or running through the hospital corridors. All I remember is bursting into the waiting room and seeing Julian's ashen face, Corinne crying into his shoulder, and Margot sitting perfectly composed in a leather chair, her legs crossed, scrolling through her phone. She looked up when I entered, and something flickered across her face. Not concern or fear, irritation. "Where is he?" I demanded. "What happened?" Before Margot could answer, a doctor emerged from the double doors. Family of Richard Parker. We all stood. The doctor's expression was professionally neutral, but his eyes held sympathy. "Mr. Parker has been diagnosed with stage 4 pancreatic cancer. The tumor is inoperable, and the disease has metastasized to his liver and lymph nodes. I'm very sorry, but the prognosis is 6 to 12 months, possibly less." The world tilted. I heard Corinne gasp, felt Julian's hand steady me. But Margot simply nodded, as if the doctor had just confirmed a dinner reservation. "I see," she said calmly. "What are the next steps?" The doctor outlined treatment options, palliative care, pain management, but his words became white noise. My father, my strong, brilliant father who'd survived poverty and loss and built an empire, was dying. When they finally let us see him, Dad was propped up in bed, looking smaller somehow, diminished by tubes and monitors. His face lit up when he saw me. "Hey, sweetheart," he said, his voice hoarse. "Sorry to scare you." I couldn't speak, just climbed onto the bed next to him like I had as a child during thunderstorms, and he wrapped his arm around me. "It's going to be okay," he whispered, even though we both knew it wasn't. Margot stood at the foot of the bed, watching us with an expression I couldn't read. "The doctor says you can come home tomorrow," she said. "I've already arranged for a private nurse and converted the study into a bedroom so you won't have to manage stairs." Dad nodded gratefully. "Thank you, darling. That's very thoughtful." "I'm taking a leave of absence," I announced. "I'm moving back to New York. I can work remotely and be here to help." Dad's eyes filled with tears. "You don't have to do that, Sloan. You have your career, your life in Chicago." But Margot cut in smoothly. "That won't be necessary. I'm his wife. I'll handle everything. Your father needs calm and routine, not disruption." The words were reasonable, but her tone left no room for argument. Dad squeezed my hand. "Let Margot help, honey. She's right. You have your career to think about. I'll be fine." That should have been my first clue that something was seriously wrong. The father I knew would have wanted me close, would have welcomed my help. Instead, he was agreeing with Margot, almost robotically. I ignored them both. Within a week, I'd negotiated remote work with my firm and sublet my Chicago apartment. I found a place in Manhattan, a tiny studio 10 blocks from Dad's penthouse, and moved in with just 2 suitcases and my laptop. Every morning, I'd show up at the penthouse ready to spend the day with Dad, and every morning, I'd be turned away. The first time, it was the housekeeper, a new woman named Greta I'd never met before. "Mr. Parker is sleeping," she said, blocking the doorway. "Mrs. Parker says no visitors before noon." I tried to push past her. "I'm his daughter, not a visitor." But Greta was immovable. "Mrs. Parker's orders." So I waited until noon, then 1 o'clock, then 2. When I was finally allowed in, Dad was in the converted study, propped up in a hospital bed, his eyes glassy and unfocused. "Hey, Dad," I said, pulling a chair close. "How are you feeling?" He blinked at me slowly. "Sloan, what are you doing here?" My heart cracked. I moved back. "Remember, I'm here to spend time with you." He smiled vaguely. "That's nice, sweetheart. That's nice." Over the next weeks, I watched my father disappear. He was always tired, always confused, barely able to hold a conversation. When I asked about his medication, a severe-looking nurse named Patricia would recite a list of drugs I'd never heard of. Pain management, Shed say curtly. Doctor's orders. But something felt wrong. Dad had always been sharp, even in pain. This wasn't illness. This was sedation. I started documenting everything, taking notes on his medication schedule, his lucidity levels, the times I was allowed to visit versus the times I was turned away. Margot was always present, hovering, controlling every interaction. If I tried to speak to Dad alone, she'd materialize with some excuse. Darling, time for your medication. The physical therapist is here. You need to rest now. The breaking point came 3 weeks after his diagnosis. I arrived at the penthouse unannounced at 7 in the morning, hoping to catch Dad during breakfast before Margot could interfere. I still had my key, so I let myself in quietly. The apartment was silent except for low voices coming from Dad's room. I crept down the hallway and peered through the cracked door. Dad was in bed, and Patricia the nurse was adjusting his IV. But it was Margot's words that froze me in place. Increase the dosage, she was saying. I need him compliant for the next few days. There are documents to sign. Patricia hesitated. Mrs. Parker, he's already at the maximum safe level. Margot's voice turned sharp. I'm not paying you to question me. Do it. I burst through the door. What the hell is going on here? Margot spun around, her face a mask of fury that she quickly rearranged into concern. Sloane, what are you doing here? I moved to Dad's bedside. He was barely conscious, his breathing shallow. What are you giving him? He can barely function. Patricia backed away nervously, but Margot stepped between me and my father. I'm managing his pain, which is excruciating. In case you've forgotten, he's dying of cancer. These medications are necessary and prescribed by his oncologist. I pulled out my phone. Then you won't mind if I call Dr. Sherman right now and confirm that. For just a second, Margot's mask slipped, and I saw pure calculation in her eyes. Then Dad stirred, his hand reaching weakly toward us. Why is everyone arguing? He mumbled. Please, I just want to sleep. Margot seized the opportunity, rushing to his side. It's okay, darling. Sloane just arrived unexpectedly and frightened me. She was just leaving. She turned to me, her voice hardening. You need to go. You're upsetting him. Dad's eyes found mine, confused and pleading. Sloane, maybe you should come back later. Those words shattered something in me. I left, but not before I saw the triumphant gleam in Margot's eyes. In the elevator, I called Julian. She's drugging him, I said without preamble. I need help. Julian and Corinne lived in a brownstone in the West Village, and within an hour of my phone call, I was sitting in their living room, hands wrapped around a cup of tea I couldn't drink, recounting everything Ed witnessed. Julian's face grew darker with each detail. I suspected something like this, he said finally. Richard changed his will 3 months ago, right after the cancer diagnosis. Margot was with him at the lawyer's office. When I asked him about it, he was vague, said he was just updating things. But here's what worries me. He replaced me as executor. I'd been his executor for 30 years. Suddenly, it's some lawyer friend of Margot's, a man named Arthur Pembroke. Corinne leaned forward. Could she have forced him to change it? Julian shook his head slowly. Not legally, not if he was deemed competent at the time. But if she was already medicating him then, his judgment could have been compromised. The problem is proving it. He pulled out his phone and made a call. I'm bringing in someone who can help us. His name is Rex Hamilton, private investigator. He's expensive, but he's the best. Within 2 days, Rex was on the case. He was a lean man in his 50s with graying hair and sharp eyes that missed nothing. He set up a command center of sorts in Julian's study, with whiteboards and timelines and photographs. The first breakthrough came within a week. Rex had been following Margot, documenting her movements, and had photographed her meeting with a man at the Waldorf Astoria, Dr. Gerald Moss. Rex said, sliding the photo across the table. He lost his medical license in New Jersey 5 years ago for Medicare fraud and overprescribing opioids. He got it reinstated last year under suspicious circumstances. I'm betting he's the one actually managing your father's medications, not the oncologist. I stared at the photo. Can we use this? Rex nodded grimly. It's a start. But we need more. I'm working on getting copies of the actual prescriptions she's filling. If we can prove the dosages are dangerously high or medically unnecessary, we have a case for elder abuse. The investigation expanded. Rex dug into Margot's background, and what he found was chilling. Her real name was Margaret Sinclair, and she'd been married twice before. Her first husband, a real estate developer in Connecticut, died suddenly of a heart attack at 58, leaving her $8 million. The autopsy at the time showed high levels of digoxin. A heart medication had never been prescribed, but the death was ruled natural causes due to his pre-existing heart condition. The second husband, a banker in Boston, divorced her after 2 years when he discovered she'd been systematically draining his accounts and forging his signature on loans. He was preparing to testify against her in a fraud case when he died in a car accident. Single vehicle, drove off a bridge at night. Police called it an accident. The fraud case died with him. She's done this before, Rex said, laying out the files. She finds wealthy men, isolates them, controls them, and either bleeds them dry or arranges their death to inherit. Your father fits the pattern perfectly. I felt sick. Why didn't anyone catch this before? Rex's expression was sympathetic. Because she's careful. She changes her name, moves to different states, and the deaths look natural or accidental. There's never quite enough evidence to prosecute. But this time, she's gotten sloppy. Maybe because your father's illness is moving faster than she expected. Julian stood, pacing. We need to move fast. If she realizes we're investigating, she could accelerate whatever timeline she has. Our second major ally emerged from an unexpected place. Harper, Dad's executive assistant of 15 years. She'd been with him since the early days of Parker Technologies, fiercely loyal and efficient. Harper called me on a Friday evening, her voice shaking. Sloan, we need to talk. Not on the phone. Can you meet me? We met at a diner in Queens, far from anywhere we might be recognized. Harper slid into the booth looking exhausted, dark circles under her eyes. I've been keeping records, she said, pulling out a folder. Margot has been bringing documents to the office for your father to sign. Legal papers, financial transfers, changes to company structure. She schedules the meetings for late afternoon when she knows he's most medicated and confused. I've watched him ask, "What am I signing?" And she tells him they're just routine business papers. Harper pushed the folder toward me. Inside were photocopies of documents transferring millions from Dad's personal accounts to accounts in Margot's name. Property deeds signed over to her. Changes to beneficiaries on life insurance policies. I made copies of everything I could, Harper said. I know it's probably illegal, but I couldn't just stand by and watch this happen. Your father is a good man. He doesn't deserve this. I grabbed her hand. Thank you. This is exactly what we need. Harper wasn't finished. There's something else. Last week, Margot fired the entire household staff, the people who'd worked for your father for years. She replaced them with her own people, all from some agency that requires NDAs. Whatever she's planning, she doesn't want witnesses. Armed with this new evidence, I went to a lawyer specializing in elder law. Her name was Catherine Walsh, and Julian had recommended her. Catherine reviewed everything we'd gathered, the photos, the medical records Rex had obtained, Harper's documents, the background on Margot's previous husbands. This is serious, she said. We have enough to file for emergency conservatorship. to have Margot removed as his caregiver and have you appointed as guardian. But here is the problem. We need to prove he's not competent to make his own decisions. That requires a psychiatric evaluation. We filed the petition the next day. But Margot's lawyers were faster. They had their own psychiatrist evaluate Dad within 24 hours, and that doctor declared him mentally competent, just weak from cancer treatments. It's a hired gun, Catherine said angrily. They paid him to say what they wanted. The judge reviewed both petitions and ruled that without Dad's own request for help or clear evidence of incompetence, he couldn't intervene. Your father has the right to choose his caregiver, the judge said. If he wants his wife to care for him, that's his choice. We walked out of the courthouse defeated. What now? I asked Catherine. She looked at me sadly. Now we gather more evidence and try again. Or we wait for your father to speak up himself. I'm sorry, Sloane. The law is designed to protect people's autonomy, but sometimes that same protection enables abuse. Just when I thought things couldn't get worse, family politics entered the picture. My cousin Bryce showed up at my apartment on a cold November evening. Bryce was my father's nephew, the son of Dad's late brother Thomas. He was 32, handsome in a slick sort of way, and had spent his adult life bouncing between failed business ventures and borrowing money from Dad. Had always been jealous of my relationship with my father, making snide comments about Daddy's little princess whenever we were at family gatherings. So when he appeared at my door with a concerned expression and a box of pastries, every alarm bell in my head went off. Sloane, he said, his voice earnest. I heard about Uncle Richard. I'm so sorry I haven't been around more. I stood in the doorway, not inviting him in. What do you want, Bryce? He had the grace to look hurt. I want to help. Look, I know we haven't always gotten along, but Uncle Richard is family, and I've been talking to him over the phone. Has worried about you. That got my attention. You've been talking to him. When? How? Bryce shifted the pastry box to his other hand. Margot's been letting me call in the evenings. She said you two have been fighting, that you're stressed about the situation and it's making things harder for him. I nearly laughed at the manipulation. That's not what's happening. But Bryce continued, his expression sincere. I believe you. That's why I'm here. Let me be the intermediary. I can talk to Uncle Richard, see what he really wants, without Margot hovering. He trusts me. Against my better judgment, I was desperate enough to consider it. Julian had warned me not to trust Bryce. That kid's always been a user, Head said. He sees dollar signs, not family. But I was running out of options, and if Bryce really did have access to Dad, maybe he could help. What would you need from me? I asked. Bryce stepped closer. Just let me coordinate some visits. I can arrange for you to see him when Margot's out of the house. She goes to her yoga class every Tuesday and Thursday morning. I'll set it up. It sounded too good to be true, and as I would learn, it absolutely was. The trap was sprung 2 weeks later. Bryce texted me. Uncle R has doctor appointment at Lenox Hill tomorrow at 10 a.m. Margot won't be there. Meet me in lobby. I should have been suspicious of how perfect it seemed, but I was too desperate to see my father. I arrived at Lenox Hill Hospital at 9:45, found Bryce in the lobby, and together we went up to the oncology floor. But when the elevator doors opened, Margot was standing there with 2 security guards, her phone held up and recording. There she is, Margot said loudly, the daughter who's been harassing my dying husband. I froze, confused. What are you talking about? Bryce said Dad would be here. But when I turned, Bryce had stepped away from me, moving to stand beside Margot. His concerned expression had vanished, replaced with something smug and cold. I tried to help you, Sloane, he said, his voice carrying to everyone in the hallway. But you've become obsessed. Irrational. Aunt Margot is just trying to care for Uncle Richard. and you won't let her do it in peace. I stared at him, understanding crashing over me like ice water. You're working with her. Margot smiled, a victor's smile. Bryce has been very helpful in documenting your harassment. The threatening phone calls, the times you tried to force your way into our home, the conspiracy theories you've been spreading about me. It's all been very distressing for Richard. That's not true, I shouted, but the security guards were already moving toward me. None of that happened. But Bryce pulled out his phone, showing me text messages, ones I'd never sent, with my name attached. You've been sending me these for weeks, he said, talking about how Margot is poisoning Uncle Richard, how you're going to expose her. It's unhinged. The messages were fabricated, expertly done, probably by Margot's people. I realized then how thoroughly it'd been set up. Every time ID confided in Bryce, every plan ID shared, had reported back to Margot. She'd known we were investigating. She'd known about Rex, about Harper, about the conservatorship filing. And she'd used Bryce to lure me into a public confrontation she could document and use against me. I want her arrested for harassment, Margot told the security guards. But one of them, an older man with kind eyes, shook his head. This is a civil matter, ma'am. We can escort her out, but you'd need to file a police report. Margot's eyes gleamed. Then I'll do that. And I'll be filing for a restraining order. My husband is dying, and his daughter is making his final days a nightmare. I was escorted out of the hospital, humiliated, with Margot's threats ringing in my ears. Outside, I called Catherine Walsh. She set me up, I said, my voice breaking. She's going to get a restraining order. Catherine's silence was damning. Sloan, if she has documentation of you showing up at a medical appointment uninvited, with a witness claiming you've been harassing her, a judge might grant a temporary order. We need to be very careful now. 3 days later, I was served with papers. Margot had filed for a restraining order, and the supporting documents were a masterpiece of lies. Bryce had provided an affidavit claiming I'd threatened Margot in his presence, saying I would make her pay for marrying my father. Text messages I'd never written were included, escalating in aggression and paranoia. Even some of the household staff, the new ones Margot had hired, provided statements about me forcing my way into the penthouse and verbally abusing Mrs. Parker. The hearing was scheduled for the following week. Catherine did her best, presenting character witnesses and arguing that the evidence was fabricated, but Margot had been too thorough. The judge granted a temporary restraining order. I could not come within 500 feet of my father, could not contact him by phone or email, could not attempt to see him in any way. This order will remain in effect until after the death of Richard Parker or until a future hearing proves these allegations false, the judge said. I sat in that courtroom, numb, as my last connection to my father was legally severed. Margot left the courthouse smiling, Bryce at her side. As they passed me, Bryce leaned in and whispered, "She's paying me $10 million. What did you think was going to happen?" That night, alone in my apartment, I hit my lowest point. I'd lost my father, my reputation, and my ability to protect him. Word of the restraining order spread through family and social circles. Suddenly, I was the unstable daughter who couldn't accept her father's new wife, who was making his final days miserable with jealousy and paranoia. Former family friends stopped returning my calls. My firm in Chicago, hearing about the scandal, asked for my resignation. They phrased it as, allowing you to focus on family matters, but the message was clear. They didn't want the drama. I spent 3 days in bed, curtains drawn, not answering Julian's calls. Corinne finally showed up with Harper, and together they staged an intervention of sorts. "Your father didn't raise a quitter," Corinne said firmly, pulling open the curtains and flooding the room with harsh winter light. Harper sat on the bed. Margot thinks she's won. That means she'll get careless. We keep gathering evidence, but I couldn't see the point. I can't even see him. I can't talk to him. What's the point of evidence if I can't use it to help him? Julian arrived with coffee and pastries. He sat in the chair across from my bed, his expression serious but not pitying. You know what your father would say right now. I shook my head. He'd say that this is when character shows. When everything seems lost. That's when you find out what you're really made of. Your father built an empire from nothing because he never quit, even when everyone said he'd fail. You have his blood, Sloane. You have his strength. Now use it. His words broke through the fog of depression. He was right. Giving up meant Margot won completely. It meant Dad died thinking it abandoned him, thinking I was the unstable, jealous daughter Margot painted me as. I couldn't let that be his last memory of me. Okay, I said, sitting up. What do we do? Rex had continued investigating and had uncovered something important. I've been tracking Margot's sister, Simone. She flew in from Paris 3 weeks ago and has been staying at the Peninsula Hotel. Expensive taste for someone who claims to be a struggling artist. I did some digging. Simone has a record too. Embezzlement, identity theft, conspiracy to commit fraud. These sisters are a team. The plan became clear. We couldn't save Dad, not with the restraining order in place. But we could gather evidence for what came next. The will reading. If we could prove Margot's manipulation and abuse, any will she'd coerced Dad into signing could be challenged. We had to play the long game now. As horrible as that was, Dad's health deteriorated rapidly over the next 8 weeks. Harper sent me daily updates, disguised as work emails in case Margot was monitoring her communications. P. Had difficult night. Nurse administered additional medication at 2 a.m. Seemed disoriented this morning. Each message was a knife to my heart. I was 10 blocks away, and I might as well have been on another planet. I'd stand outside the penthouse building at night, looking up at the windows, wondering if he was looking out, wondering if he asked about me, wondering if he thought I'd abandoned him. The call came on a frigid January morning. Not from Margot or any family member, but from a news alert on my phone. Tech billionaire Richard Parker dies at 62. I stood in my tiny apartment, staring at the notification, feeling like the floor had dropped away. He was gone, and I hadn't been there. I hadn't held his hand or told him I loved him one more time. Margot had taken that from me, and I would never get it back. The funeral was planned for 3 days later, an obscenely short time that didn't allow for proper grieving, or for out-of-town family to arrange travel. Catherine Walsh called to tell me I could attend, as the restraining order didn't prohibit me from public gatherings, but I had to stay 500 feet away from Margot. Street, Patrick's Cathedral was packed with hundreds of people. Business associates, technology industry leaders, politicians, and society figures. Dad would have hated the spectacle. Had always said he wanted a simple service when his time came, just close friends and family sharing stories. This was a media circus. News vans lined the streets. Photographers jostled for position, and at the center of it all was Margot, dressed in a custom black Chanel suit, designer sunglasses hiding her eyes, playing the devastated widow to perfection. I watched from across the street, standing in the cold, as people approached her with condolences. She dabbed at her eyes with a handkerchief, leaned into the embraces, and spoke in what I'm sure was a trembling voice about my beloved Richard and his tragic loss. The worst part was hearing the whispers around me from people who didn't know who I was. "Where's the daughter?" one woman asked. I heard she and Richard were estranged, her companion replied. Some falling out over the new wife. So sad that they never reconciled. I wanted to scream, to shout the truth. But Catherine's words echoed in my head. Any disruption at the funeral will only make you look worse. Stay quiet, stay strong, the truth will come out. Julian and Corinne spotted me across the street. They couldn't come over without violating the social dynamics of the situation, but Julian caught my eye and nodded once. A message, we're with you. Hold on. The fourth villain revealed herself at the funeral reception, held at the penthouse. I wasn't invited, of course, but Rex had managed to plant a listening device in one of the flower arrangements, and Harper attended as Dad's longtime employee. Through the device, I listened to Margot hold court in my father's home, accepting sympathy and praise for being such a devoted wife during his illness. And then a new voice entered the audio feed, a woman's voice with a slight French accent, warm and charming. My sister was a saint. The voice said. Richard was so lucky to have her. Simone had emerged from the shadows. Rex had been tracking Simone since discovering her presence in New York, but she'd been careful, never meeting with Margot in public, always staying at different hotels, using cash for transactions. Now, emboldened by Richard's death, she was openly playing the role of supportive sister. Over the listening device, I heard Simone working the room, making connections, gathering information. How well did you know Richard? She'd ask. Did he ever mention his business plans? She was fishing, trying to figure out who might contest the will, who had loyalty to my father versus loyalty to Margot, mapping the battlefield for what came next. But Simone made a critical mistake. Late in the evening, when most guests had left, the listening device picked up a private conversation between the sisters in Dad's study. Did you find it? Margot asked. The document he mentioned. Simone's frustration was clear. No. I searched his office at Parker Technologies, but Julian has everything locked down tight. If Richard left any kind of confession or separate will, it's somewhere we haven't looked. Margot's voice turned sharp. Keep looking. The reading is in 1 week. We need to know what we're dealing with. So they knew something was coming. Some surprise Dad had planned. That gave me the first real hope I'd felt in months. The days between the funeral and the will reading were tense. Margot hosted what she called an intimate gathering at the penthouse to celebrate Richard's life, which was really just an opportunity for her to show off her position as widow and presumed heir. She invited key Parker Technologies board members, major investors, and society friends. I was obviously not invited, but Harper attended and reported back. She's acting like she already owns everything, Harper said, talking about my company and my properties. Bryce was there too, strutting around like he's already spent his payoff. And Simone was going through Richard's personal office, looking for something. Rex managed to hack into Margot's email through a contact he had, and what we found was illuminating. Correspondence with Arthur Pembroke, her lawyer friend, discussing the will. Everything is airtight, Pembroke had written. The will I drafted leaves the bulk of the estate to you, with a trust fund for the daughter to avoid complete disinheritance, which could be challenged. She'll get enough to be comfortable but not enough to matter. You'll control Parker Technologies through your voting shares, and all properties transferred to you. He signed it 6 weeks ago, and I have 2 witnesses to his sound mental state. Margot's response. Perfect. The ungrateful brat will be lucky to get anything after how she treated Richard at the end. Then, 1 week before the scheduled will reading, I received a certified letter. It was from a law firm I didn't recognize, Whitmore, Ashford and Associates. The letter was brief and formal. You are required to attend the reading of Richard Parker's last will and testament on January 28 at 2 p.m. at our offices. Attendance is mandatory per the terms of the will. Failure to appear may result in forfeiture of any bequests. I called the number on the letterhead and asked to speak with Mr. Whitmore. His secretary was polite but firm. Mr. Whitmore will address all questions at the reading. He asks that you please be punctual. I immediately called Julian. Did you get a letter from this Whitmore person? His voice was strange when he answered, almost amused. I did. Sloane, I think you need to trust your father. He always had a plan. That night, I pulled out the box of Dad's things I'd kept in my closet. Photos from my childhood. Birthday cards had written me. The watch had given me when I graduated college with a note. Time to build your own empire. Sweetheart. Am so proud of you. I sat on my floor, surrounded by memories, and I let myself cry for the first time since his death. Not just for losing him, but for how he'd lost me at the end. Isolated and controlled by a woman who saw him as nothing but a bank account. I'm sorry I couldn't save you, Dad. I whispered to his photo, but I promise I won't let her win. The offices of Whitmore, Ashford and Associates occupied the 42nd floor of a building in Midtown, all glass and steel and expensive taste. The reception area had marble floors and abstract art that probably cost more than most people's houses. I arrived 15 minutes early, my hands shaking despite Catherine Walsh's calming presence beside me. Whatever happens, she said, stay composed. Don't react emotionally. Let the law handle this. Julian and Corinne were already there, and Julian gave me a small, encouraging smile. Harper arrived shortly after, looking nervous but determined. Then Margot swept in with an entourage. Simone, Bryce, and Arthur Pembroke, her lawyer, all of them radiating confidence. Margot took one look at me and her lip curled. I'm surprised you have the nerve to show your face, she said loudly enough for everyone to hear. After everything you put your father through. I bit my tongue, remembering Catherine's advice. Bryce smirked at me. This should be good, he muttered to Simone, who was recording everything on her phone. We were ushered into a large conference room with a table that could seat 20. At the head sat an elderly man with silver hair and sharp blue eyes, dressed in an impeccable suit. I'm Harrison Whitmore, he said, his voice carrying authority. I've been practicing estate law for 42 years, and I had the privilege of knowing Richard Parker for the last 6 months of his life. Please, everyone, take a seat. Margot moved to sit at the head of the table, closest to Whitmore, but he gestured to specific chairs. Mrs. Parker, you'll sit here. He indicated a seat in the middle of the table. Miss Parker, you'll sit here, he said, pointing to the chair directly across from Margot and closest to him. Margot's smile faltered slightly, but she recovered. Where is Arthur? She asked. He was supposed to be handling this. Whitmore's expression didn't change. Mr. Pembroke was not designated to execute this will. I was. Richard Parker came to me personally 5 months ago and requested that I handle his estate exclusively. I saw Margot and Arthur exchange a panicked look. Something was wrong with their plan. Once we were all seated, Whitmore opened a leather portfolio and removed a cream envelope sealed with red wax, embossed with my father's signet ring. The room fell silent. Before I begin, Whitmore said, I want to make clear that I personally verified Richard Parker's mental competency at the time this will was executed. I brought in Dr. Elizabeth Morrison, a psychiatrist with no connection to any party involved, who spent 3 hours evaluating Mr. Parker. Her report is available for review. Additionally, the signing of this will was recorded on video, per Mr. Parker's request. The video shows him reading the will aloud, confirming his wishes, and signing without any coercion or duress. Margot's face had gone pale. What video? I was never told about any video. Whitmore smiled slightly. That was intentional, Mrs. Parker. Mr. Parker specifically requested that you not be present for this will's execution. He broke the seal and removed the papers. Let me begin. I, Richard Theodore Parker, being of sound mind and body, do hereby declare this to be my last will and testament, revoking all previous wills and codicils. Margot leaned forward, When was this dated? Whitmore looked at her over his reading glasses. December 3rd of last year. Approximately 7 weeks before Mr. Parker's death. That was after Margot had taken complete control of the house. After the restraining order. After it'd been cut off completely. Whitmore continued reading. To my beloved daughter, Sloane Alexandra Parker, I leave the entirety of my estate. The room exploded. Margot shot to her feet. That's impossible. This is fraud. Richard would never do that. Bryce was yelling too. Something about lawyers and lawsuits. Simone's phone was up, recording everything, but I sat frozen, unable to process what I'd just heard. Whitmore raised his hand for silence, and something in his commanding presence made everyone quiet down. If you'll allow me to continue, the will specifies exactly what comprises this estate. He read through the list, and with each item, I watched Margot's face transform from shock to fury to something like fear. The penthouse apartment, valued at $22 million. The beach house in the Hamptons, valued at $15 million. The mountain estate in Aspen, $18 million. Dad's personal investment portfolio worth $12 million. His art collection, another $4 million. But the real shock was the shares in Parker Technologies. To Sloane Alexandra Parker, I leave my 85% controlling interest in Parker Technologies, Incorporated. Whitmore read. The current estimated value of these shares is $120 million. I couldn't breathe. It was real. All of it was real. This can't be legal. Margot shrieked. I'm his wife. I have rights. This will was clearly made when he wasn't in his right mind. But Whitmore was prepared for this. He pressed a button on a remote, and a screen descended from the ceiling. I anticipated that question. Mrs. Parker, this is the video recording made on December 3rd in this very conference room. The video began. And there was my father, my dad, sitting in a chair, looking tired but clear-eyed and lucid in a way I hadn't seen him in months. Dr. Morrison was visible in the frame, confirming for the record that she'd just completed her evaluation and found Richard Parker to be fully competent, aware of his assets, aware of his family relationships, and capable of making informed decisions about his estate. Then Dad looked directly at the camera. My name is Richard Parker. Today is December 3rd, and I'm here of my own free will to record my final wishes. I want to be absolutely clear. I am not under any duress. I am not being coerced, and I am of sound mind. The will I'm about to sign reflects my true wishes, which I've thought about carefully. He paused, and I saw him glance at something off camera, where Whitmore must have been standing. I know there will be questions about why I am leaving everything to my daughter and not to my wife. I want to explain that decision. Margot was shaking her head frantically. Turn it off. This is a violation of privacy. But Dad's voice continued from the speakers. Over the past months, I've become aware that my wife, Margot Parker, married me under false pretenses. She has systematically isolated me from my daughter and my friends. She has controlled my medications, kept me in a state of confusion, and has been positioning herself to inherit my wealth. I know this because I've been more aware than she realized. The medications she thought were keeping me compliant, I've been disposing of when she wasn't watching. I've been pretending to be more out of it than I was because I needed time to protect my daughter and gather evidence. My hand flew to my mouth, had known everything. I installed hidden cameras in my home 3 months ago, Dad said on the video. I've recorded Margot conspiring with her sister Simone, with a doctor, Gerald Moss, who's been providing unnecessary medications, and with my nephew Bryce, who betrayed my trust for money. I've recorded her plans to accelerate my death once she felt secure in her control of my assets. I've compiled all of this evidence, and it's been given to Mr. Whitmore to be delivered to the appropriate authorities after my death. Dad's image on the screen looked directly at the camera, and I felt like he was looking at me. Sloan, baby, if you're watching this, I'm so sorry. I'm sorry I had to put you through these last months. I'm sorry I couldn't tell you what I was doing. But I had to play along until I could ensure Margot would face justice and you would be protected. Tears were streaming down my face. Corinne reached over and squeezed my hand. Dad continued, to Margot, I leave $1, the minimum required to show she wasn't forgotten but specifically disinherited. I also leave her the contents of Safety Deposit Box 447 at Chase Manhattan Bank. She'll understand the significance of that soon enough. He paused, seeming to gather strength. To my nephew Bryce, I leave nothing. He chose money over family and loyalty over love. He knows what he did, and he'll have to live with that. Bryce had gone ashen. To Julian Caldwell, my best friend and the brother I chose, I leave my gratitude and appoint him as executor of my estate and advisor to my daughter as she takes over Parker Technologies. Julian, guide her. She has the mind and the heart for it. The video ended with Dad signing the will, witnessed by Whitmore and 2 other attorneys from the firm, neither of whom had any connection to anyone in the room. The lights came up, and Whitmore looked around the table. Are there any questions about the validity of this document? Margot had collapsed into her chair, her face a mask of calculation as she tried to figure out her next move. Arthur Pembroke was gathering his things, clearly abandoning ship. Bryce looked like he might be sick. But then Whitmore said something that made Margot's head snap up. Now, as to the matter of Safety Deposit Box 447, Whitmore produced a small brass key and slid it across the table to Margot. Mr. Parker's will specifies that you must open this box in the presence of all parties named in the will, as well as representatives from the Manhattan District Attorney's Office who will be joining us shortly. Margot stared at the key like it was a snake. I don't want anything from that box. Whatever game Richard is playing, I'm not participating. But Whitmore's expression was implacable. I'm afraid you don't have a choice, Mrs. Parker. The will specifically states that if you refuse to open the box, you will be held in contempt of the estate proceedings, and the contents will be opened by court order. Additionally, you forfeit even the $1 bequest, and any claims you might make as a surviving spouse. 2 people in dark suits entered the room, Detective Sarah Rodriguez and Assistant District Attorney Marcus Chen. One of them said, flashing badges, "We're here pursuant to Mr. Whitmore's call regarding potential criminal evidence." Margot looked wildly at Arthur Pembroke. Do something. But Arthur was already backing toward the door. I'm sorry, Margot. I can't be involved in whatever this is. I have to protect my license. He practically ran from the room. Simone stood up. I don't have to be here for this. But Detective Rodriguez stopped her. Actually, Miss Sinclair, we'd like you to stay. You're mentioned in some documents we've been made aware of. We took 2 cars to the Chase Manhattan Bank in the financial district. A surreal convoy of lawyers, family, and law enforcement. At the bank, we were escorted to a private viewing room, and Margot was handed the key. Her hands shook as she inserted it into box 447. The bank manager used his key simultaneously, and the long metal box slid out. It was heavy. He placed it on the table in the center of the room, and Whitmore nodded to Margot. Please, open it. She lifted the lid, and I heard her sharp intake of breath. Inside was a thick accordion folder, a USB drive, and several envelopes addressed to various people, one to me, one to the police, one to the district attorney, and one simply labeled evidence. Whitmore put on gloves and carefully removed each item. He opened the folder first, and inside was a complete dossier on Margot. Rex Hamilton's investigation was thorough, but this was something else. Dad had hired multiple investigators, had records going back 20 years. Margaret Sinclair's birth certificate, marriage licenses for her previous marriages, death certificates for her previous husbands, medical examiner's reports that Dad had somehow obtained, showing elevated levels of cardiac glycosides in husband number 1, and inconsistencies in the accident report of husband number 2. There were financial records showing how Shed drained their accounts, forged documents, and stolen identities. But that wasn't all. There were records of Margot using 3 different names in 3 different states, each time scamming elderly or vulnerable people. A fraud charge in Nevada under the name Margaret Holbrook, an identity theft case in Arizona under the name Maggie Sullivan, restraining orders from families who'd accused her of elder abuse. Everything was documented, organized, tagged with legal tabs. Dad had built a federal case against her. Detective Rodriguez was photographing everything, her expression growing grimmer with each page. Then Whitmore held up the USB drive. Mr. Parker indicated this contains video and audio recordings from hidden cameras installed in his residence. He wanted them reviewed in this setting before being submitted as evidence. We watched hours of footage condensed into key clips. Margot and Dr. Moss in the kitchen of the penthouse, discussing medication dosages. He needs to stay confused but not so drugged he can't sign documents. Margot said on the screen, "Can you prescribe more benzodiazepines?" Dr. Moss nodded. "I can, but you're playing a dangerous game. Too much, and you'll leave obvious traces." Margot smiled coldly. "That's why I'm paying you $50,000 a month, to make sure there are no traces." Another clip showed Margot and Simone in Dad's study. "Once he signs the new will Arthur drafted, we can speed things up," Margot said. "A little extra morphine, call hospice, say he's in pain. No one will question it." Simone looked uncomfortable. "You said we just had to wait for the cancer to do its job." Margot's laugh was chilling. "That could take months. I'm not wasting time. Besides, you'll get your 20% faster." Then came the clip of Margot coaching Bryce. "You need to get Sloane to trust you," she said. "Make her think you're on her side, then lead her into a trap where I can document her being unstable. We need her completely out of the picture, ideally with a restraining order so she can't interfere." Bryce, his voice eager, replied, "If I help you with this, you'll make sure I get my cut." Margot patted his hand. "10 million, darling, just like we discussed. But you have to be convincing." By the time the last clip finished, Margot was crying, not tears of remorse but tears of rage and fear. Simone had her head in her hands. Bryce had tried to leave and been stopped by Detective Rodriguez. Then Whitmore opened the envelope, addressed to the police. It was a letter in Dad's handwriting, notarized and witnessed. "To whom it may concern," had written, "I am Richard Parker, and I am writing this while still alive and of sound mind to report that I am being abused by my wife, Margot Parker, born Margaret Sinclair. She is systematically poisoning me with unnecessary medications, isolating me from my loved ones, and planning my murder to inherit my wealth. I have been pretending to be more impaired than I truly am in order to gather evidence of her crimes. I have installed hidden cameras in my home with the help of a private security firm. Everything captured on these cameras was done with my consent and in my home. I am providing this evidence so that after my death, she can be prosecuted for elder abuse, conspiracy to commit murder, fraud, and any other applicable charges." The letter went on to detail every medication Shed given him that wasn't prescribed, every time Shed isolated him from me or Julian, every forged document. It was thorough, methodical, and damning. Ada Chen looked at Margot with something like disgust. "Margaret Sinclair, also known as Margot Parker, you're under arrest for elder abuse, conspiracy to commit murder, fraud, and theft." Detective Rodriguez pulled out handcuffs, reading Margot her rights as she snapped them on. Margot was screaming now. All pretense of the elegant widow gone. This is entrapment. You can't use evidence he gathered while pretending to be incompetent. I want my lawyer. But Chen shook his head. He was competent, as established by multiple medical evaluations. And a person has every right to gather evidence of crimes being committed against them in their own home. Simone was arrested next, charged as an accomplice. I didn't do anything, she protested. I was just visiting my sister, but the videos showed otherwise, showed her searching Dad's office for evidence, discussing timelines for his death, planning how to access his assets. Bryce was the most pathetic, trying to claim had been manipulated by Margot, that he hadn't understood what was happening. But his words on the videos, his eagerness for the payout, his betrayal of me for money, it was all there. He was arrested for conspiracy to commit fraud and obstruction of justice. As they were led out in handcuffs, Margot turned back to look at me, and the hatred in her eyes was pure. You don't deserve that money, she spat. You're just a spoiled little girl who never had to work for anything. I met her gaze steadily. And you're a murderer who targeted vulnerable people. My father was smarter than you, and now you'll pay for what you did. After they were gone, the room felt oddly quiet. Whitmore opened the envelope addressed to me. Inside was a letter in Dad's familiar handwriting, and I could barely see the words through my tears. My dearest Sloane, had written, if you're reading this, I'm gone, and I hope the plan worked. I hope Margot is facing justice and you're safe. I'm so sorry I had to shut you out these last months. It was the hardest thing I've ever done, pretending I didn't want you around, letting you think I'd chosen her over you. But I had to make her believe Shed won so Shed be careless. I had to protect you from her, and the only way to do that was to make her think you were no threat. The letter went on for pages, telling me how much he loved me, how proud he was, how Head watched me grow into a woman of integrity and strength. The money and the company are just things, he wrote. What matters is that you know you were loved. You were always loved. From the day you were born to my last breath. Build something beautiful with Parker Technologies. Help people. Make the world better. That's the legacy I want to leave. Not wealth, but the impact you'll have with it. Be bold, be kind, be true to yourself, and know that wherever I am watching over you and cheering you on. I love you forever, Dad. I pressed the letter to my chest, sobbing, while Julian and Corinne held me. Harper was crying too, and even Whitmore looked emotional. My father had saved me, even in death, had known exactly what Margot was and had outmaneuvered her completely. The woman who thought she was so clever, who'd gotten away with murder before, had finally met her match. The arrests of Margot, Simone, and Bryce were international news within hours. Black Widow tech wife arrested for elder abuse screamed the headlines. Billionaire's secret recordings expose murder plot. The media circus that descended was overwhelming. Camera crews camped outside the building where I lived, reporters shouting questions whenever I left. Catherine Walsh became my spokesperson, issuing careful statements about respecting the legal process and trusting that justice would be served. But privately, the DA's office was building a case that went far beyond what we'd imagined. Margot's arrest triggered investigations in 3 other states where Shed lived under different identities. Within 2 weeks, prosecutors in Connecticut reopened the case of her first husband's death. The original medical examiner had noted the elevated digoxin levels but ruled the death natural due to the victim's heart condition. Now, with the context of Margot's pattern, they exhumed the body and did more extensive toxicology. The results were damning. Levels of digoxin consistent with deliberate poisoning over several weeks. The DA announced murder charges in that death. In Massachusetts, they reopened the investigation into her second husband's car accident. An engineering analysis of the vehicle, preserved in an impound lot, revealed that the brake lines had been deliberately cut in a way designed to fail gradually. more charges. But it was Simone who provided the most shocking testimony when she decided to cooperate with prosecutors in exchange for a reduced sentence. In a conference room at the DA's office, with Catherine and me present as representatives of Dad's estate, Simone laid out the entire conspiracy. "We've been running this con for 8 years, she admitted, her hands shaking. Margot would find wealthy men, usually widowers or divorced, always with adult children. She'd charm them, marry them quickly, then systematically isolate them from their families. I'd help by posing as staff or friends, gathering information, looking for any evidence that could expose us later." Simone explained that the original plan with Dad was different. She was going to wait for the cancer to kill him naturally. That was the safest approach. But when Sloan started investigating, when that conservatorship filing happened, Margot panicked. She decided to speed things up. According to Simone, Margot had been preparing to give Dad a fatal dose of morphine the week before he died, to make it look like he'd passed peacefully from the cancer. But then Richard started being more alert, asking questions, refusing medications. She realized something was wrong, but not that he'd been faking the whole time. So she held off, scared that if he died too suddenly, there'd be an investigation. Simone also revealed something I hadn't known. Margot had another victim lined up. There's a widower in Miami, retired hedge fund manager worth about $200 million. She'd already made contact with him, planning to move on as soon as Richard's estate was settled. I was supposed to go to Miami and set up the groundwork. The Miami police were immediately notified, and the intended victim was warned. Had been corresponding with a Madeline Sinclair Hod, seemed so understanding about his late wife's death. The revelations about Bryce were equally disturbing. Prosecutors discovered had racked up massive gambling debts, nearly $300,000 owed to some dangerous people. Had approached Margot desperate for money, and she'd seen an opportunity. "I'll pay off your debts and give you $10 million, she'd told him. "If you help me neutralize Sloan." Bryce had jumped at the chance, never considering that he was helping to abuse and potentially murder his uncle. When confronted with this by investigators, Bryce tried to claim he didn't think Margot would actually harm Dad. "I thought she just wanted to keep Sloan away so there'd be no drama," he said in his statement. But the videos showed otherwise. In one clip, Bryce explicitly asked Margot, "What happens to Uncle Richard after you get control of everything?" And she'd replied, "What do you think happens?" Bryce had laughed. Dr. Gerald Moss was arrested at his clinic in New Jersey. His medical records showed he'd prescribed medications to Dad that were contraindicated for pancreatic cancer patients. Medications that would increase confusion and compliance but do nothing for pain management. Had also prescribed doses far above what was medically appropriate. When investigators searched his clinic, they found records of other elderly patients, all of them with complex medication regimens prescribed by Moss, several of whom had died under suspicious circumstances. It appeared he'd been running this scam with multiple partners, Margot just being one of them. He faced dozens of charges across 2 states, and his medical license was permanently revoked. Arthur Pembroke, Margot's lawyer, was investigated for ethics violations and potential conspiracy charges. The will he'd drafted for Dad, the one that left everything to Margot, had been signed when Dad was heavily medicated. Pembroke claimed he'd verified competency, but the video footage showed Dad barely able to focus, signing where told without reading the documents. Pembroke had witnessed the signing and notarized it, all while Dad was clearly impaired. The Bar Association opened an investigation, and Pembroke was disbarred. He avoided criminal charges only by cooperating fully and providing all documentation of his dealings with Margot. The household staff Margot had hired were investigated too. Nurse Patricia lost her license for administering medications without proper authorization and falsifying medical records. Several of the other staff members were charged with conspiracy after it emerged they'd been paid extra to keep family members away and report on Dad's activities to Margot. Only a few of Dad's original staff, including the longtime cook Mrs. Chen, had been fired for refusing to participate in the isolation of Dad from his visitors. I tracked down Mrs. Chen and Harper helped me rehire her, offering her a settlement for the wrongful termination and back pay for the months she'd lost. As for the will contest, Margot's legal team made a desperate attempt to challenge Dad's final will, arguing that the video evidence was inadmissible because Dad had been deceptive about his mental state when Margot thought she was giving him medications. She was operating under the assumption he was impaired. Her lawyer argued. Therefore, any evidence he gathered while pretending to be impaired should be excluded. But Judge Patricia Morgan, who heard the contest, was unimpressed. A person has every right to pretend to be impaired in their own home to gather evidence of crimes being committed against them, she ruled. Mrs. Parker's assumption that her victim was helpless doesn't protect her from the consequences of her crimes. The will contest was dismissed. 6 months after Dad's death, the legal situation had resolved itself clearly. Margot was facing 28 years in prison for charges including elder abuse, conspiracy to commit murder, fraud, identity theft, and multiple counts related to her previous husband's deaths. Simone received 8 years for her cooperation. Bryce was sentenced to 5 years for fraud and conspiracy. Dr. Moss received 15 years. And I was left standing in the ruins of my father's final months, holding the inheritance head protected for me but wishing more than anything I could have had him back instead. The money meant nothing compared to what I'd lost. But there was one more piece of unfinished business. The restraining order that had kept me from Dad in his final weeks was based on false testimony and fabricated evidence. Catherine helped me file a motion to have it vacated and expunged from my record, and Judge Morgan granted it immediately. This order was obtained through fraud and perjury, she stated. It is hereby vacated as if it never existed. She also ordered Bryce to issue a public apology, which he did through a written statement, though the words meant nothing coming from him. The damage had been done. It lost precious time with my father that I could never get back. And no legal remedy could fix that. 6 months after the will reading, I stood in the office that had been my father's at Parker Technologies, the space now officially mine. The transition had been challenging. Many of the board members were skeptical of my ability to lead a multi-billion-dollar company, seeing me as just the grieving daughter playing at business. But Julian stood beside me at every meeting, and together we began reshaping the company into something that honored Dad's original vision of ethical technology that protected people rather than exploiting them. We restructured the board, removing the members Margot had installed and bringing in people with integrity and expertise. We launched new initiatives focused on data privacy and security for vulnerable populations, including the elderly. But my most important project was the Richard Parker Foundation for Elder Justice. I donated $10 million to establish it, with a mission to provide legal aid for victims of elder abuse, to fund investigations into suspicious deaths of elderly people, and to create education programs about recognizing and preventing exploitation. The foundation also offered support groups for family members who'd been isolated from their loved ones, because I knew firsthand the helplessness and guilt that came with watching someone you love be controlled and knowing you couldn't save them. At the foundation's launch event, I spoke publicly for the first time about what had happened. My father was a brilliant, strong man. I told the room full of donors, advocates, and press. But he was vulnerable in his illness, and someone he trusted exploited that vulnerability. She isolated him, drugged him, and planned to murder him. The only reason justice was served is because he was smart enough and resourceful enough to fight back. But most victims don't have those resources. Most victims suffer in silence, and their families are powerless to help them. That ends now. Id started therapy shortly after the arrests, working with Dr. Rachel Torres, a specialist in trauma and grief. In our sessions, I processed not just Dad's death, but the complex emotions around how Head handled the situation. Part of me understood why Head shut me out, why Head had to make Margot believe Shed won, but another part of me was angry that Head put me through that pain, that Head let me think he didn't want me around, that Head died with us estranged in the eyes of the world. It's okay to hold both truths, Dr. Torres told me. He did what he thought he had to do to protect you and ensure justice. And what he did hurt you deeply. Both can be true. Over time, I came to a place of peace with it, understanding that Dad had given me the greatest gift he could, the truth, justice, and protection, even at the cost of our relationship in his final weeks. My relationship with Julian and Corinne deepened during this time. They'd lost their best friend, and Id lost my father, and we grieved together in a way that was healing. Julian mentored me in business with patience and wisdom, never making me feel incompetent even when I made mistakes. Corinne helped me navigate the social aspects of my new position, introducing me to philanthropic circles and teaching me how to handle the constant attention that came with being a young female billionaire. People will underestimate you, she said. Let them. Then prove them wrong. Harper became more than just Dad's former assistant. She became my chief of staff and trusted friend. She knew how Parker Technologies worked better than anyone, and her loyalty to Dad extended to ensuring his daughter succeeded. The criminal trials were emotionally exhausting. I attended every day of Margot's trial, sitting in the courtroom with Julian and Harper, watching as the prosecution systematically dismantled her lies. The defense tried to paint her as a loving wife who'd been entrapped by a paranoid, dying man, but the videos didn't lie. Neither did the evidence from her previous marriages, the testimony from Simone, the medical experts who explained exactly how the medications Shed given Dad had impaired his cognition. When the jury returned after 4 hours of deliberation with guilty verdicts on all counts, I felt no joy, only a deep, tired satisfaction. Justice had been served, but it didn't bring Dad back. At sentencing, I was allowed to give a victim impact statement. I stood at the podium, looking at Margot in her prison jumpsuit, her blonde hair now dull and unstyled, her face haggard. "You didn't just try to kill my father," I said, my voice steady. "You killed the last months we should have had together. You stole his dignity, his autonomy, his peace. You made his final days a nightmare of confusion and isolation. And you tried to make me believe he didn't love me anymore, that had chosen you over me. That psychological torture was almost worse than the physical abuse you inflicted on him." I paused, gathering my emotions. "But you failed. My father outsmarted you. He protected me and ensured you'd face justice. And now you'll spend the next decades in prison, alone and forgotten, while I live the life he made possible." I hope that thought haunts you every single day. Judge Morgan sentenced Margot to 28 years in prison without possibility of parole for the first 15 years. "You are a predator who has left a trail of victims across multiple states," the judge said. "You show no remorse, only anger that you were caught. The harm you've caused is incalculable, not just to your victims but to their families. This sentence reflects the severity of your crimes and the need to protect society from you." Margot was led away screaming that the trial had been unfair, that I'd bought the judge, that Shed appeal. But her appeals were denied at every level. The evidence was simply too overwhelming. I visited Dad's grave every week, at the cemetery where Mom was buried too. They'd wanted to be together, and I'd made sure they were. Their headstones side by side in a quiet corner overlooking a pond. I'd bring white roses, his favorite, and I'd talk to him about the company, the foundation, the trials, and my life. You would have loved what we're doing with Parker Technologies, I told his headstone one sunny spring afternoon. Julian and I launched a new security platform specifically designed to protect vulnerable people from digital exploitation. It's already being used by elder care facilities across the country. We're actually making a difference, Dad. We're helping people. Id started dating again, slowly and carefully. Id met Graham Mitchell at an architecture conference where Id been invited to speak about designing accessible technology campuses. He was an architect specializing in sustainable housing, and we'd bonded over our shared passion for creating spaces that served communities rather than just generating profit. Graham had known me before the inheritance, back when I was just another architect trying to make a difference, and he loved me for who I was, not what I had. We took things slow, building trust carefully, and he never pressured me to move faster than I was ready. I'm still learning how to trust people again. I admitted to him on one of our early dates. Had taken my hand and said, "Take all the time you need. I'm not going anywhere." 1 year after Dad's death, I organized a memorial service, a real one, the kind he would have wanted. It was small, held at the cabin in Vermont we'd visited every summer of my childhood. Julian and Corinne came, Harper came, and about 20 other people wa'd truly known and loved my father came. We told stories, laughed at memories, and cried together. I scattered some of his ashes on the hiking trail where we'd walked countless times, and I felt his presence there in the wind through the pines and the sound of the stream rushing over rocks. "Thank you, Dad," I whispered to the mountains. "For everything. For loving me enough to protect me. For teaching me integrity. For showing me that the right thing isn't always the easy thing. It'll make you proud. I promise." Standing in his office at Parker Technologies one afternoon, I looked at the photo ID placed on the desk of me and Dad at my college graduation, both of us grinning with pride. Next to it was the letter he'd written me, framed, where I could read his words whenever I doubted myself. "Build something beautiful," he'd written. "Help people. Make the world better." That became my mission. I expanded the company into new areas of assistive technology, creating devices and software that helped elderly people maintain independence while staying safe. We partnered with the foundation to offer free security systems to elder abuse victims. We funded research into detecting cognitive decline and preventing exploitation. 2 years after Dad's death, Parker Technologies was more profitable than ever. But more importantly, it was doing good work in the world. Business publications ran articles about the transformation. How Sloane Parker turned her father's legacy into a force for social good. The tech heiress who put ethics first. I didn't do it for the recognition, but it felt good to prove that I deserved what Dad had given me. That I wasn't just a lucky daughter but someone who could build on his vision and make it even better. And every success felt like honoring him, like proving that his faith in me had been justified. One evening, I was working late in the office when Harper knocked on the door. "There's someone here to see you," she said. "Says it's important." I was surprised to see an elderly woman I didn't recognize, dressed neatly and carrying a worn purse. "Miss Parker," she said, her voice shaking slightly, "my name is Dorothy Brennan. You don't know me, but your foundation helped my family. My husband was being abused by his caregiver, stealing from him, keeping him drugged. I didn't know what to do, and then I saw a news story about your foundation. They helped me get a lawyer, helped me report the abuse, helped me get him safe. Has home now, and has getting better. I just wanted to say thank you." I invited her to sit, and we talked for an hour about her husband, about how scared she'd been, about how helpless she'd felt. It was my story reflected back at me, and I realized this was why Dad had done what he did. Not just to protect me, but to create a legacy that would protect others. When Mrs. Brennan left, I sat in the quiet office and let myself cry. Not from sadness, but from a kind of bittersweet pride. The money Dad had left me was enabling real change. His death had meaning beyond the tragedy. That was his final gift. Now, 3 years later, I've built a life that honors his memory, while being fully my own. The foundation has helped hundreds of families. Parker Technologies is thriving and ethical. I'm in a healthy relationship with Graham, and we're talking about the future. Maybe marriage. Maybe kids. I've reconciled with the extended family members who'd believed Margot's lies about me, understanding that they were manipulated too. And I've forgiven Bryce, not for his sake, but for my own peace. Though I'll never have a relationship with him again, I've learned that you can forgive someone and still enforce boundaries, that closure doesn't require reconciliation. The most important lesson I've learned is that wealth without integrity is worthless. Margot had the chance to be part of something real, to be loved by a good man and welcomed by his daughter, but her greed destroyed her, and she'll spend decades in prison because she couldn't see past dollar signs to the human cost of her actions. Dad showed me that how you use power and money reveals your character. You can use it to exploit and harm, or you can use it to protect and build. That choice defines who you are. I choose to build. I choose to protect. I choose to honor the man who gave me everything by making sure his legacy helps others. On the 3rd anniversary of Dad's death, I went to his grave with Graham beside me. I told Dad about the Foundation's latest project, about the new wing we were opening at Parker Technologies focused on health tech for aging populations, about the scholarship program WED launched for underprivileged students, and I told him that I was happy, truly happy, in a way I hadn't been sure I'd ever be again after losing him. You saved me, Dad, I said quietly, my hand resting on his headstone. Even when I thought you'd abandoned me, you were protecting me. You gave me justice, safety, and the tools to build something meaningful. I hope wherever you are, you can see what we're doing and you're proud. As Graham and I walked back to the car, I thought about everything I'd been through. The betrayal, the isolation, the fight for justice, the inheritance that changed everything. People ask me sometimes if I wish I could go back and change things. If I wish Dad had just divorced Margot and saved himself the pain. But the truth is, his choice to gather evidence and ensure justice was served saved other people from becoming Margot's victims. The man in Miami who was warned. The families who learned from our story to recognize the warning signs. The legal precedents set by the case that made it easier to prosecute elder abuse. So would I change it? No. Because Dad's story, as tragic as it was, created something bigger than our pain. It created awareness, protections, and justice. And that's the inheritance that matters most, not the $191 million, though I'm using it well, but the lesson that love protects, integrity matters, and truth always wins in the end. Margot thought she was clever. She thought she'd found the perfect victim, but she underestimated the depth of a father's love and the power of doing the right thing, no matter the cost. Now it's your turn. Have you or someone you know ever dealt with a manipulative family member or suspected elder abuse? What warning signs do you think people should watch for? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe to the channel for more real-life stories about justice, family, and finding strength in impossible situations. Thank you for being here with me through this journey. Remember, integrity can't be bought or stolen, and love finds a way to protect us, even from beyond. May you have the courage to fight for what's right and the wisdom to know that true wealth is measured in character, not currency. Until next time, take care of yourselves and the people you love.